Do you think with all the working out Chris Hemsworth had to do for his first superhero role that he ended up a little Thor? It's day 119 of 365. Today's movie, Thor. If you love the MCU, big franchises, or just movies in general, Stub Movie Club is the spot for you. There we're breaking down these daily movies as well as deeper dives into monthly suggestions. We have a private Discord, and you can discover all of that and more with the link in my profile. Directed by Kenneth Branagh and starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, and Tom Hiddleston, this is where the MCU first let their freak flag fly. The first three MCU movies were safe bets. Hulk is something we had seen before and had his own TV show previously. Iron Man was more of a swing, but because it's so earthbound and less sci-fi and more action-based, I think those were a little safer overall. Thor is the first time that they were really trusting the audience to show up even if it was going to be weird. This is where I give the Easter eggs from the MCU their due credit. Putting Thor's hammer at the end of Iron Man 2 gave us just enough information to do our little bit of research. This is what turns into the entire MCU rumor mill that makes millions of dollars on YouTube right now. Back at the time, it was the most random places. Comicbook.com was like one of the few places you could go to learn a little bit more about the production of the movie, as well as the comic books you should be reading to get more information. Needless to say, walking into this movie, I was excited. I was the target audience, right? They knew they were going to get my money. And I was specifically excited because at the end of Iron Man 2, that Thor hammer reveal had my theater of, I think, 6 people for the midnight showing absolutely freaking out. There was a guy in the back going, "Thor, friggin' Thor!" It became a vocal stim for me for months to come afterwards, and by the time this movie came out, I was the one screaming about Thor. In 2025, revisiting this, the movie honestly feels a little quaint, if not maybe a bit nostalgic as well. I like that it's serious. I understand the comedy direction that we went in. That makes sense for this series and for the fish out of water stuff that you get way more mileage out of. That makes sense. But the first time they're doing this, it feels like Shakespearean Superman more than a comedy series. And so I like that we at least got one that was like this. Now that we're on this end of the MCU, I like the oddballs, I think, overall more than anything because they feel so unique, especially when you compare that to the sameness that we got from Phase 3 on. So if you're feeling worthy, let's talk about the 3 things that I loved about Thor. The first thing that I love about Thor, and something that you're probably going to find arguments about online, is I love the camera work. Now, the Dutch angles, let's talk about them. A Dutch angle is when we take our screen and we kind of turn it on its axes just a little bit to make things look off. Now, this has a specific reasoning to use in cinematography, especially when things are perfectly flat, level, in landscape. To pitch things off to one side or the other is to say that the world is off in some way or another. The reason I think this works is because this is the first of our fish out of water movie series for Thor. He's used to Asgard. Asgard is flat and level and normal to him. Earth is off. It's offbeat, it's a little slanted, things are different here. And so highlighting that, especially for a Shakespearean Kenneth Branagh director type, this is cinema language 101. It's not especially unique. There are other ways you could have done this. But I think for him, doing something big budget like the MCU, trying to bring the gravitas that he felt that it deserved, I understand this choice overall. It's a little overused, I understand that argument, but there are other aspects of the camera work that aren't Dutch angles that are absolutely phenomenal. Let me point out a scene to you that you probably never even noticed. And it's a scene where Natalie Portman and Stellan Skarsgård are walking into the hospital where Thor is. The camera moves from behind them to around them to up into the ceiling. That kind of camera work is not absolutely necessary for getting a scene done, but it just shows that this is a director working with the camera. He's not doing things that are just locked off static shots, and especially compared to where the MCU has ended up post-COVID, so much of the camera work is just really wonky, flat, and boring. When I think about Quantumania, and I know that's one of the worst ones to pick on, but when I think about the camera work in that movie versus the camera work in Thor, Thor is at least interesting interesting to look at. Its uniqueness stands out when you compare it to the flatness that happened post-COVID, where everything had to be as like close and centered and green screened as possible. Even No Way Home, for having some amazing shots within it, is overall not nearly as interesting as the overall product of Thor. The second thing that I really love about this movie that honestly I didn't catch until my 2025 rewatch is how Superman this movie is. There are some distinct differences, of course. This is a totally different fictional reality. However, I think Kenneth Branagh recognized the big guy, long flowing cape, from another place, feeling exiled from his family. These things are very Superman coded. Even the approach to how we display Thor's powers across the movie is like Superman. It assumes the audience is aware overall, but then has these specific moments highlighting what he can do. The first time he fights the Frost Giants, he's using his hammer in a very Hammer way, a D&D party would understand. Later on in that fight, however, when the monster's been revealed and we finally have a boss for him to take down, he starts spinning the hammer and uses it as a projectile weapon, flying through the monster and landing full superhero pose. And keep in mind, superhero pose wasn't really a thing at this point, so this might have been one of the first ones that we're seeing. I really dig that Branagh kind of understood that this is Superman in Shakespeare. He's doing the gods that would drop down from the literal deus ex machina of the plays of Shakespeare, but with a Superman tone. The MCU is just superheroes. This is a really classical approach. For someone who may not have even been a big fan of Marvel Comics, Branagh knew the correct approach to this specific material. By the time we get to the middle of the movie and Thor has lost his powers and is fighting an army guy in the middle of their new base built around his hammer, this is where we see the full Superman on display. He's still a warrior, this guy that wants to kick ass because he knows that he can. He's kind of in his Clark Kent mode because he doesn't have access to the suit. But that's an interesting thing that we would like to see Superman do in our movies. I'll actually point out we don't see that in any Superman movies. He's always donned in his costume when he's fighting for justice. So to see Superman in a t-shirt and jeans as we've seen him appear in the comics would be really cool. Branagh kind of beat them to the punch. The third and final thing that I really dig about Thor is its simplicity. I think that's honestly where its charm lies. Thor the Dark World is lambasted, I think the most out of the MCU beyond Quantumania at this point. And I don't think that's totally fair, but that one's going to show up later on in this series, so I'll save that for then. From there, the subsequent two Thor films are both comedies from Taika Waititi. That's exactly my speed. They're very funny. They're meant to be taken tongue-in-cheek. They're kind of set around and about a character that's hard to take seriously to begin with, so I understand that shift towards comedy. This first one, on the other hand, is just so simple, it's so straightforward, that I think its real power lies within that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to make Thor work, we just have to make Thor earnest to make him work. Having scenes like him hanging out with Selvig and getting drunk together before having a heart-to-heart with Natalie Portman, those kinds of things go a long way for humanizing a character. We don't often see scenes like that in the MCU where we take the time to just let our characters hang out with each other. I remembered the scene where he got drunk with Selvig, but I had forgotten how it started. And it starts off with a threat, right? He's telling Thor to get out of town after he buys him his first drink, but it's when they lock eyes while they're taking sips of that drink where they start a drinking contest. There's no dialogue to explain this, and we don't see the events of that night. We just see the outcome with Selvig getting carried home by Thor and getting dropped off at Natalie Portman's RV. That's a lot to communicate in your movie, and leaning on the audience to understand this very simplistic, straightforward, time-skipping thing is really intelligent of the director. We don't get scenes like this anymore in the MCU. I just saw Thunderbolts recently, and as much as I like that movie, and as great as the charisma and chemistry is between the leads, they're still not given many of those cool hangout moments. So I just appreciate Thor taking the time to do that. But what do you think? How do you feel about Phase 1? What's your favorite of the Phase 1 movies? Captain America is going to be coming up on the list in just a couple films, and I think that first Avenger film is one of my favorites of Phase 1. That's going to do it for Thor. Next time we're talking about The Hangover 2. The Wolf Pack is back. And as always, I'll see you tomorrow.